Yes,
I believe Senator Barker is conducting the General Laws Committee meeting, so I'll get things started. And in his stead, Clerk, could you call the roll?
yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Barker, Senator Saslaw, Senator Hanger,
Here.
Senator Newman,
Here.
Senator Deeds, Senator Marsden,
Here.
Senator McClellan. Thank you.
All right. Jason, I believe you're probably first up here on the agenda for an overview of the governor's proposed budget amendments for the 2020-22 biennium for transportation, Senate Bill 1100. Is that you?
It would be Senator Marsden, but since Madam Secretary has been so kind to grace us with her time, I took the staff liberty and rearranged the agenda last night to provide deference where it's due. So if it's okay with you, I will drive the slides for Secretary Valentine, and anything she doesn't cover, I can address at the end of the presentation.
That'll be great. Secretary Valentine, welcome to the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Transportation, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, I did text you earlier today. Your message did pop up on my phone, and I will be at your disposal whenever we can connect. So thank you very much for that. So Jason, could I just say to you to change the slides, to go to the next slide? Can you just go to the next one, the multimodal slide? Yeah, that one, which I think just shows what we do in transportation. I will also just let you know that with me today are Deputy Secretaries Nick Donahue and John Lawson, and Director Jennifer Mitchell from DRPT has joined us as well. So I'm just always just so pleased to be able to work with my committee. I will say that it's really impossible to start a meeting these days without recognizing the times in which we are living with COVID, our priorities on health and safety of our customers, our employees, our partners, the commitment across the entire transportation secretariat, from the port, barges, trucking, aviation, rail, transit, DMV, a commitment to transport critical goods and to connect people to essential work, food, medicine, as we are all managing the financial implications of the pandemic on the Commonwealth, our economy, and infrastructure. So all of these pieces all working together to manage the financial as well as to keep Virginia moving. Next slide, Jason, thank you. I was recently in a forum with the Secretary of Transportation from Maryland and Director Mauritian, who's actually going to be working for the Biden administration from DC. And a reporter just said, you know, 2020 ushered in many great things, one of which was the omnibus bill, the omnibus transportation bill in Virginia. And for those of you who may not remember, it seems so long ago, I don't know if Senator Saslaw is on the call yet, but, you know, certainly, I'm sorry? Anyway, certainly it was a very important bill in Virginia. It transformed transportation funding. It created the structure for transforming rail in Virginia. It established the Transit Ridership Incentive Program and created the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, which is a financial commitment to our multimodal system. When that bill was passed, when you all passed it at the end of the 2020 regular session, it was expected to generate nearly $500 million annually, but certainly COVID has had a significant impact. For FY 2020, the reduction in transportation revenues was $120 million. And based on the August interim forecast, we are expecting a reduction of $400 million in FY 21 and $350 million in FY 22. From FY 20 through FY 22, a reduction in revenues of about $870 million. Next slide, please. Certainly, these reductions are significant. For those of you who know our Smart Scale program, the third round of Smart Scale was about $850 million for every transportation district in Virginia for 2 years. So managing that is very serious. And through this, our priorities have been consistent. How do we maintain our current priorities in our 6-year improvement plan, our pipeline of projects? How do we maintain our workforce, and how do we in transportation contribute to economic recovery here in Virginia? In the special session, working with the governor and with you, the members of the General Assembly, there was a budget amendment that was passed that did provide flexibility just over the biennium to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. It allowed the Transportation Board to, through flexibility, to protect our projects in the pipeline and to phase in the programs in the omnibus bill. The CTB was granted authorization to use a cash management system to reallocate resources from those projects that receive funding in the early years of a 6-year improvement plan, but according to their own schedules, do not require those funds until the latter years in the 6-year improvement plan, and gave us the ability to put every dollar to work today, allowing every project to remain in the program on time, according to their own schedule. Next slide, please. I don't need to tell you that the special session went through November 9th. The governor signed the revised budget on November 18th. On November 24th, we took these proposed actions, the flexibility that was provided to the CTB, we took those actions to the board. On December 9th, CTB adopted the updated 6-year improvement program. And on December 11th, we reported those actions to the General Assembly. Again, due to the flexibility, we've been able to maintain all existing projects according to their own schedules. Next slide, please. This slide shows how that was actually done within the 6-year improvement program. The CTB utilized $495.1 million from revenue sharing projects. Again, from those that received the funding in the early years, including some deallocated revenue sharing funds that were deallocated by the localities themselves. In the bottom chart, it shows how we restored those funds over the 4-year period from 21 through 24. And then beginning in 2025, new monies coming in to implement a new round of revenue sharing programs. We kept our commitment and showed it over the 6-year window. Our main goal was not to cut projects, cut priorities, cancel contracts, and lay off workers. We wanted to keep Virginia's infrastructure moving. Next slide, please. In December, we all received the new forecast. It was really our first opportunity to get some insight to look at the longer term implications from COVID-19. It appears that based on that, looking out FY23 to FY27, as I said, through 22, it was down $870 million. From 23 to 27, it appears the average reduction is about $230 million. Over a 7-year period, FY21 through 27, and I mention that because in the December forecast, the FY21 numbers were included. So looks like we are looking at a $1.8 billion reduction from what we were counting on at the end of the General Assembly session in 2020. However, I will say that with the passage of the omnibus bill, we are still expected to generate about $200 million of new funds for the new transportation spending once the omnibus is fully implemented in FY24.
Secretary Shanahan?
Yes?
Just to ask a couple things. One, you need to speak a little bit louder so we can hear you. The other is the reduction because you're expecting, a lot of people to continue staying at home. I know gas volume's down about 50% at most places. which takes the gas tax with it. Is that what is driving, expected new work patterns plus, this COVID? Is that what's driving these new projections?
It's kind of interesting. We're still trying to get a clear understanding of all of these projections. The CTB actually got a presentation yesterday that on average across Virginia, driving is up to about 80 to 90%, depending on the region in Virginia. So, driving patterns, how they drive is a little different. Afternoons, the peak periods are busier than the morning, so more flexibility. Really, I think it's a consumption issue as we're looking over the longer term. Yes, the consumption of gas patterns, new work patterns, the motor vehicle sales and use tax is down as well. So we're really trying to, to work with predictions and trends and how all of this is going to be affect us. Again, these are the first insights into this, Senator Saslaw. So we, over the coming months, are going to be monitoring this very closely and happy to work with you and keep you informed on what we're learning as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Secretary Valentine, please continue.
Can you hear me better?
Yep.
Okay.
Please continue.
My
Thanks.
volume is all the way up, so I'll try to speak a little bit louder. Thank you. Next slide, please. Can I just say, though, to Senator Saslaw's follow-up, passing the omnibus bill was so important to Virginia being in the position that it is. Unlike so many other states that are having to cut, we are really managing this, I believe, in a way that serves Virginia in the best way possible. And being able to manage this right now, I think, is very, very important. The dedicated funding for Metro that passed in 18, the interstate funding, the I-81 funds in 19, and the omnibus transportation bill, all of those decisions that you all made really created a foundation for us to weather this. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Jason. So yesterday at the Commonwealth Transportation Board, we did present the 6-year improvement plan numbers, program numbers. It appears we have about $45.5 billion through 2020 through FY 27. That includes $5.7 billion going to the regions in Hampton Roads, Northern Virginia, and now the Central Virginia Transportation Authority in the Richmond metropolitan area. It dedicates $14.3 billion to maintenance and operations. It provides for $13.5 billion for construction. And all the details that were outlined yesterday by VDOT CFO Laura Farmer, I have asked my team to send to Senate staff so that you all have access to all of that information as we are moving through these numbers. Next slide, please. Also yesterday, we announced step 1 in our Smart Scale process. The staff recommendations for Smart Scale were released. Smart Scale is the prioritization process based on data for new capacity transportation projects. There were about 400 applications that had been submitted by localities, MPOs, PDCs, about $6.3 billion of requests in Smart Scale funding. We have available, based on our forecast, about $1.37 billion in funding available, even though it is more money than we had in our 3rd round of Smart Scale. This is now our 4th. As you all can see, the needs continue to outpace the resources available. About $980 million were in statewide revenues and $390 million from the regional fuels tax that was in the omnibus bill. 152 projects were recommended across Virginia. Next slide, please. I will just add that that was step one. Over the next 5 months, we will be working with our partners, localities, MPOs, the public, having public hearings, and the final vote on those will occur in June. We also, as you know, received federal COVID funding. Congress passed another COVID relief bill on December 21st. The president signed it on December 27th. 45 billions did go for transportation across the United States, 14 for transit, 10 billion for state DOTs, 1 billion for Amtrak, 16 billion for airlines, 2 billion for airports, and 2 billion for private bus companies. Next slide. As part of it, the transit, the $14 billion in transit, WMATA did receive funding. This particular slide is pre-COVID-19 relief. So before that funding was brought in, I just thought I'd take a moment just to say what condition that WMATA was in. For FY21, WMATA was looking at an $176 million reduction. For FY22, nearly $500 million. Without any funding relief, there were serious service reductions, 19 station closures, and up to about 3,800 employees that were going to have to be laid off. That's about a third of WMATA's workforce. And there was an expectation that WMATA was going to continue to ask for a 3% increase from localities for their subsidies in FY22. That was the picture. So now, Jason, the next slide. So with the COVID relief, about $830 million went to the greater Washington region, Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland. $112 million went to VRE, PRTC, and MTA. $108 million went to the local bus operators in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, leaving about $610 million to go for WMATA. It is significant, those funds. However, it will not relieve WMATA of some significant and longer impacts, financial impacts going forward. Last week, the WMATA board proposed to keep service levels the same during the calendar year of 2021. So they're going to try to maintain service through that period, and they are not going to, they are proposing not to request a 3% increase from the jurisdictions. There is still going to be a funding gap once January of 2022 hits. The amount that they're predicting is about a $210 million shortfall, based not just on the gap in the funding, but on the fact that they are maintaining service, they're not reducing their workforce, and so the additional service commitments that they have just makes that gap even larger. So January of 22, there will be some very serious decisions, but they're hoping to and planning to work through this year to address all of these financial issues. Next slide, please. Statewide, we did receive funding for transit here in Virginia in the urbanized area, as I mentioned. In the Northern Virginia, the $830 million. Hampton Roads did get about $10 million. Richmond, about $3.6 million. Blacksburg, about $136,000. There are 12 other urban areas in Virginia that did not receive funding in this particular round. In the first round of the CARES funding, they received 75% of their FY18 operating costs. There was a cap. If you received 75%, you did not receive additional funding at this time. I've asked Director Mitchell and Jen DeBrule, our Chief of Public Transportation, to monitor our systems to see how they are continuing to move through this time in which we all find ourselves. So we, have constant contact with them, but these 4 are going to be receiving funding. Our rural transit systems also had reached their cap. They actually received 125% of the FY18 operating costs. So they did not receive funds in this time. Again, we are monitoring them at all times. There were state-wide funds for the mobility of seniors and people with disabilities in this COVID relief package, $890 million. Going statewide, Nova did receive about 890,000. Nova received about 591,000. Next slide, please. The state DOTs did receive funding in this COVID relief bill. We have not received formal guidance from FHWA yet on the actual amounts or what restrictions or flexibility there will be available with those funds. We are hoping or expecting to receive approximately $250 million. We know that the state won't receive all those funds because some areas, some MPOs will be also receive a portion of those funds. But it appears from early discussions that this money may be more flexible. Once we do receive confirmation and guidance, we will work with the governor's office, seek input, and prepare some recommendations. Next slide, please. In the budget, there are 2 budget proposals that request funding, one-time general fund funding for 2 initiatives. One for expanded rail service in Southwest Virginia, $5 million to support regional trails. Next slide, please. The Western Rail Initiative is requesting $50 million in general funds to add a second train from I always say Lynchburg, the Lynchburg-Roanoke service up to Washington, D.C., and expanding that rail service to Christiansburg, Blacksburg, and over to Virginia Tech. So there would be 2 daily Virginia trains that would exist in that region. We are in negotiations with Norfolk Southern as we speak. I will tell you that this has been a dream for a very long time. Really, since the train was launched in 2009 in Lynchburg, it was the questions about how do we expand it to Roanoke, to Christiansburg, Blacksburg, and even to Bristol. And, the plan has always been to expand it, as we are able to do this in a financially smart way and meeting demand. The transaction will cost a little more than $200 million. Again, we're in negotiations. We're not exact on that amount, but I will tell you that having been involved with this for this past year and a half and being aware of trying to get a second train since probably 2014, we've never been this close to having this rail service become a reality. We are very close to getting this done. Investing in the infrastructure improvements, the acquisition costs, the track improvements. Like every transportation project, we are trying to put together the revenues and the sources to make this possible. Beyond that $50 million, we did put in a smart scale request for $50 million. It was a Commonwealth Transportation Board request across jurisdictions, Northern Virginia, Culpeper, Lynchburg, and Salem. It ranked number 1 as a project in safety and in accessibility, and it was recommended for funding with high priority dollars. So again, we're moving through a process, but looking at smart scale, there is some multimodal funds in the I-81 improvement plans. We plan to make a proposal to that committee. Federal grants, we are always working to put together. And then of course, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority funds as well. So we're very close. Next slide, please.
Secretary Valentine?
Yes.
Quick question. Are you seeing much commuter traffic between Lynchburg and Roanoke? In other words, people living in Roanoke, working in Lynchburg, or vice versa?
Yes, it is. I don't have those numbers right now, but, it was surprising. We did a Lynchburg connectivity study. Again, this is probably 4 years ago now. But yes, that commuter route does exist. But I will tell you that the ridership studies that we have done for this particular extension is predicted to bring in about 80,000 new riders to Amtrak. The demand is there. We always start with buses and fill the buses up until we can get the tracks out there. So the demand is there, and there's 40,000 students that we could actually reach out there with our colleges and universities in Southwest Virginia. And just expanding rail opportunities to all the colleges that exist on the 29 corridor as well. I will say that over the last 10 years, the ridership just on the existing train has gone up about 77%. It has always exceeded ridership and revenue projections. The train that runs today is the only train in Virginia that covers 100% of its operating costs. The demand is there. Really the dream of having this service has been there for a very long time. Norfolk Southern is at the table. We would like to help make this opportunity come true. And it's just an important priority for the governor that a couple of slides from now, I'm going to give you an update on transforming rail in Virginia and where we are with the $3.7 billion agreement with CSX, and making sure as we do that we connect Central and Southwest Virginia to the economic and commerce hubs in the Commonwealth and beyond. So I will say we would very much like to see this happen. Next slide, please. There was also $5 million one-time funds to help develop these regional trails. There's no program in transportation for these regional trails that cross jurisdictions. The economic return on these investments is remarkable in economic development and tourism and health and the quality of life of people who live near these trails, and for those who visit or want to come to live near these trails. It's really quite significant. We have the Virginia Capitol Trail. It generates about $8.9 million in economic impact. It's about 52 miles between Richmond and Williamsburg. We have the New River Trail. That's between Pulaski and Galax, about 59 miles, generates about $25.6 million a year in user spending, 50% on the Virginia Creeper Trail. People travel more than 260 miles to actually use that particular trail from Abington to White Top, near Mount Rogers. The trails that we're looking at, and with this $5 million, the Commonwealth Transportation Board would come up with a priority system for how we could invest, but we're looking over at the Eastern Shore, the Shenandoah Valley, and the Ashland to Petersburg Trail, now known as the Fall Line Trail. But they really are, they've always been a tremendous economic opportunity for the Commonwealth. But I will say that during COVID, their importance has been highlighted even more. So that those funds are also in the budget for one-time use. Next slide, please. And I mentioned to you the Transforming Rail in Virginia. It is the agreement with CSX, with our partners, with Amtrak and with VRE, the construction of Long Bridge, 350 miles of right-of-way, 225 miles of track, 37 miles of improvements, doubling the Amtrak service along the RFMP between Richmond and Washington, D.C. with nearly hourly service, increasing VRA about 75%, enhancing the service over to Newport News. We also purchased the S-Line down to Ridgeway, North Carolina, and a segment between Doswell and Covington, the Buckingham branch, to enhance that service as well and to preserve it for future rail service. there are many, many moving pieces. I will say that from our team's perspective, this has been quite a year keeping all these moving pieces together through such great uncertainty. I'm very happy to report to you that the final EIS for Long Bridge was completed in September of 2020. We did receive a favorable opinion from the Surface Transportation Board. We are not a common carrier, which was the decision we were looking for. The Long Bridge Act of 2020, which gives permission to Virginia and DC to build a rail bridge across the National Park Service land. Turns out you can do that with a highway, you cannot do it with a rail bridge. It was patroned by Senators Kane and Warner, in the House by Congressman Whitman and Byers, so supported by our entire delegation, members from Maryland and DC. And when the omnibus package was signed December 27th, that language also passed. So it literally took an act of Congress, and just great thanks to the team on getting that through. VRE signed their funding commitment. It was finalized on December 4th of 2020. And we are in the final weeks, months of completing the funding agreement with Amtrak, which is still committed to $944 million to this project, and our agreement with CSX. Just many pieces all coming together and tremendous work going on, again, through great uncertainty. And Jason, you're going to hit my multimodal slide again, I think on the next one. That is a brief overview on where we are in transportation, some highlights from a financial standpoint. Again, we are getting insights into all of this. And as we get a clearer picture as we move forward, we're always very happy to share that with you. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or any member of my team will as well.
Thank you, Secretary Valentine. Appreciate it. If only we hadn't had this pandemic, what a great budget it was going to be for transportation. But it was not to be. Any questions from the subcommittee? Going once, going twice. Secretary Valentine, thank you very, very much for your presentation, and I will call you here as soon as this is over. I got a little something I want to talk over with you. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Hanger.
Thank you. Secretary Valentine, before you get away, I think we probably will cover this later and maybe next week in another session, but we've been struggling across the state with the COVID and DMV operations. And specifically, one of the items that has just been recently brought to my attention is the fact that we are, and this impacts the economy, that we're not able to get testing for commercial driver's licenses in a timely manner, and some of the titling for new trucks that they want to get on the road. So that's one of the issues that we'll be bringing up with the commissioner and with staff a little later. So I wanted you to be aware of that, because I'm sure it's on your list of things to monitor, but it's something I think we need to address in some way.
I really, really appreciate that. Top priorities, health and safety of citizens and our employees. Thank you for bringing it to my attention, and I also will reach out to the commissioner about that issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Valentine. Next up, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, and thank you, Secretary Valentine, for a thorough overview of about 90% of the actions that are included in the governor's proposed and introduced budget. I'm going to take about 3 to 5 minutes, and as soon as I can pull it up, I am going to a quick walkthrough of the budget summary document, which you are all provided copies of, is available on our webpage. And if you are interested in reading and don't have a copy, please see me and I'll certainly make sure to get one to you. But the governor's introduced budget does provide an increase, as the secretary mentioned, of $55 million over the biennium from general funds, and a net increase over the biennium of about $175 million in non-general funds. When you account for the ups and downs of the forecast, I would remind the members that back in the reconvened, there was no reduction taken against the budget, the forecast that was adopted with passage of the bill last year. So that negative 281 will be in the first year will be the sort of net effect of the loss of the funding in the first year, and then the extrapolated number over the 6-year plan that the secretary presented to you is sort of that, as she framed it, the longitudinal impact of the coronavirus on forecast revenues over the planning horizon. When you turn to the Department of Aviation, there are two small amendments in the Department of Aviation, both intended to address responses to air travel's decline during the pandemic. The first is language that would allow the Commonwealth Aviation Board, the Virginia Aviation Board, to temporarily increase individual commercial airport entitle funding by up to 20% for each of the 8 commercial airports. It would average out to about $400,000 per airport based on criteria and needs demonstration to be developed by the board. It's unlikely that all of the commercial airports would qualify, but the criteria would have to be developed. If fully implemented, the net effect of aviation's revenues would be about 3.2 million non-general funds. The other language amendment in the Department of Aviation provides DOAV flexibility in administering the governor's new airline incentive fund. Senator Newman might recall working with Senator Edwards last year on SB 990, which was to provide to allow for aviation funds to be used to provide incentive grants to attract new airline services. Given the fact that nobody is currently flying, or at least it's beginning to pick up, the recommendation is to allow grants to be made for the retention of commercial service at those commercial airline or at those commercial airports. The next amendment there at aviation is a spreading of, is an adjustment for anticipated increases in federal funds. It's technical. At the Department of Motor Vehicles, there are also several language amendments, one related to indirect cost allocation recovery due to interpretation of federal grant and federal grant cost recovery policies that the Commonwealth has. It doesn't have any impact on the general funds that are currently transferred, or the funds that are currently transferred to the general fund through indirect cost recovery plans. So it's good policy. With respect to the Real ID implementation, there is a proposal to continue the 60 positions that were authorized last year. Real ID has been extended for a year. I have been speaking with Commissioner Holcomb. It seems like because the FTE is supported by the fee and the traffic went down, they're not overstaffed, and the fee continues to support these positions. But Mr. Chairman, based on Senator Henger's observations, we do have an open slot next week on the agenda. If it is the will of the subcommittee, I can certainly invite Commissioner Holcomb to help fill that spot for you. And then finally, in capital outlay, there is a proposal to allow 3.5 million of non-general funds to be used to replace an existing customer service center in Winchester. At the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, the Secretary covered the majority of the spending initiatives there. I will highlight for you some language amendments, again, related to the current pandemic, that allows for delaying local transit strategic plans that were required under legislation passed last year.
Jason, this is Senator Marsden. Do you anticipate? I couldn't quite make out what you were saying. Are we going to need another extension on Real ID? Is the federal government considering anything like that?
Mr. Chairman, the federal law has extended by 1 year the federal deadline for Real ID implementation. So the proposal in the introduced is to just allow the authorized position level to stay at the level that was authorized to implement Real ID. It had been contemplated that the 60 positions that were specifically focused on Real ID would go away in fiscal year 22 as the feds required Real ID to be fully implemented. And since that's been extended, the bodies needed to support the program's implementation would be continued. That is the proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Turning to the Department of Transportation, the Secretary covered the multi-use trail program, as well as the changes to the forecast. I think the only thing worth noting as a policy observation is that the I-81 program debt service account is established, which is a good sign. You will recall you authorized $1 billion in bond proceeds for I-81 improvements last year. The budget being proposed to have debt service payments there indicates that a planned debt sale would be in the horizon for fiscal year 22 to try to get ahead of construction of some $2.2 billion worth of identified improvements along the 81 corridor. There's also a proposal to authorize the transfer of about a half an acre in Norfolk that is VDOT right-of-way. It's adjacent to a park and ride lot to just transfer that from VDOT to Norfolk Southern. Have not heard any complaints or concerns raised. Heretofore, I have not asked the commissioner to present on that. And Mr. Chairman, there are a couple of small technical language amendments in VDOT as well as at the Port Authority that are, they do result in reflecting additional cash at VDOT, but that is simply to reflect accounting standards, government GAAP accounting standards, and it doesn't actually result in new money. And so I have taken you through all of the changes that are in the proposed. If you have any questions on the small technicals, I'll happily spend time with you on it. If not, that completes the agenda for today.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions for Mr. Powell on his presentation? Jason, do you have anything else?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I will tell you that, as I mentioned, we had an open space on the agenda. I intend to have Director Mitchell provide a little more detail on the state of transit operations post-COVID. Maybe we'll have some clarity on any potential need that our partners out there in the regional authorities might have. I would bring to the members' attention a request for $30 million in general funds to support NVTC operations. So maybe we can explore that with Director Mitchell next week. And I will invite Commissioner Holcomb to respond to Senator Hanger's questions. And that would be the next week agenda.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. I think the one thing we can all agree on is what a spectacular job I did substituting for Senator Barker. If we don't have anything else, the committee will rise.